Some days change your life so quietly that you don't realize it until everything you used to be is already gone. For Captain Naomi Harper, that day started with nothing more dramatic than a flat tire on the side of a highway. 42 seconds later, a police officer had shot her while her hands were cuffed behind her back. And the part that still makes people shake their heads is this: Naomi wasn't committing a crime. She was helping someone. Now, if you've ever worn a uniform, military or otherwise, you probably know the feeling Naomi had that morning. That quiet sense of purpose when you put the pieces together. The pressed fabric, the polished insignia, the discipline you've carried for years. Naomi was a Marine Captain Logistics Officer, the kind of person people trusted when things got messy and someone had to stay calm. She had served in combat zones, helped move wounded troops to safety, done the kind of work that never makes headlines but keeps everyone alive. And on that rainy afternoon, outside a small stretch of highway in Virginia, she was just driving back toward base after a short leave, trying to grab a quiet lunch before the next round of duty. Then she saw a little Honda Civic sitting crooked on the shoulder hazard lights, blinking one tire completely shredded. Beside it stood a young woman who looked about 20 years old, maybe 21, hugging herself and staring at the damage like she'd never dealt with something like this before. Naomi slowed down without even thinking about it, pulled over, stepped out, and walked toward her with the calm confidence that came naturally after years of leadership. The girl introduced herself as Ava Reynolds, voice shaky, hands trembling as cars roared past them on the wet highway. Naomi smiled in that steady, reassuring way people sometimes have when they've seen worse things than a flat tire. She asked if Ava had a spare. Ava nodded. Naomi said, "All right then. We're halfway done already." Ava apologized about 3 different times for delaying her, and Naomi laughed a little and said, "Trust me, if helping someone with a flat tire ruins my day, then I'm doing pretty well." That small joke broke the tension just enough for Ava to breathe again. Naomi knelt beside the tire sleeves, damp from the mist, loosening the lug nuts while calmly explaining each step so Ava could follow along. You could tell this wasn't the first time Naomi had stepped into a situation where someone else felt overwhelmed. She had that natural authority that makes people settle down just by hearing your voice. And for a few minutes, that roadside looked like nothing more than 2 strangers sharing a small act of kindness. Then the police cruiser pulled up. No lights, no siren. Just a sudden stop behind Naomi's vehicle and the heavy slam of a car door. Officer Derek Whitaker stepped out with the kind of posture that said he'd already made up his mind about something. He didn't look at the shredded tire. Didn't look at Ava. His eyes locked on Naomi, a black woman wearing a Marine uniform. Naomi stood slowly and raised her palms in a calm gesture. "Captain Naomi Harper, United States Marine Corps," she said clearly. "I'm assisting this civilian with a flat tire." She reached into her pocket and held out her identification, the military card that showed her name, rank, and service credentials. Whitaker barely glanced at it. Then he tossed it into the mud beside the road. "Step away from the vehicle," he said, voice sharp with a kind of contempt he didn't bother hiding. "I know a fake uniform when I see one." Ava froze. Naomi didn't raise her voice, didn't move with anger. She had dealt with tense situations before. She kept her tone steady and said, "That's federal identification you just threw into the mud." Whitaker stepped closer, one hand resting on his holstered weapon. "You refusing a lawful order?" Naomi turned her head slightly toward Ava and said quietly, "Stay where you are. You're my witness." That was as far as she got. Whitaker surged forward, grabbed Naomi's arm, and slammed her chest first against the hood of the vehicle. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. Before she could even finish saying she wasn't resisting, metal cuffs snapped around her wrists and locked her hands behind her back. Ava had already pulled out her phone. The camera shook in her trembling hands, but it kept recording. Rain streaked down Naomi's cheek as she tried to steady herself. She looked over her shoulder and said, "Officer, my hands are behind my back." Whitaker stepped away and drew his gun. "Don't reach," he shouted. Naomi stared at him, confused more than anything else. "My hands are cuffed." The gunshot cracked through the rain. The bullet hit her square in the chest. For a moment, everything went silent except Ava screaming. Naomi collapsed onto the asphalt, her uniform darkening as blood mixed with rainwater and spread across the pavement beneath her. She couldn't feel her legs anymore. She tried to breathe, but every breath felt shallow and sharp, like her ribs had shattered. Ava ran toward the road, waving her arms at passing cars, still holding the phone that had captured everything. People started slowing down, some pulling over, some shouting for Whitaker to lower his weapon. But Whitaker stood there, breathing hard, gun still pointed forward, like the scene didn't need explaining. Then he reached for his radio. "Suspect reached for her waistband," he said calmly. That lie became the first official record of what happened. By the time paramedics arrived, Naomi's pulse was barely there. They rushed her into the ambulance, still wearing the cuffs because protocol said she was a suspect. Her uniform was cut away in the emergency room before anyone realized the insignia on it was real. For hours, she was listed as an unidentified impersonator. Meanwhile, Ava sat on the floor of her dorm bathroom with her back against the wall, shaking as she stared at her phone. The 28-second video she had uploaded was spreading across the internet faster than she could process. First thousands of views, then millions. People everywhere watched Naomi calmly identify herself, watched the officer throw her ID into the mud, watched him cuff her, then shoot her while her hands were behind her back. Then suddenly the video started disappearing. Platform after platform flagged it as graphic content. Links vanished. Searches returned nothing. For a moment it looked like the evidence might simply fade away. But someone had already downloaded the original file. Within hours, prosecutors received an anonymous message with the video attached and a simple note that read, "Please don't let them erase this." That was the moment the story stopped being local. Federal investigators stepped in almost immediately. Agents seized the cruiser's dashcam, Whitaker's body camera, and every digital record connected to the incident. And when technicians examined the body cam footage, they found something that made the case explode. 38 seconds were missing. Not corrupted, not glitched, manually deleted. The missing window lined up exactly with the moment Naomi had shown her identification and the moment the gunshot rang out. At the hospital, Naomi fought to stay alive while surgeons repaired the damage. The bullet had shattered bone and severed a major artery. They managed to stabilize her, but the injury to her spine was catastrophic. Even if she survived, the doctors said she would never walk again. News of the shooting spread through military networks almost instantly. Marines at Quantico held silent formations. Veterans organizations began organizing protests. Naomi's mother appeared on national television with a calm strength that broke people's hearts. "My daughter survived Fallujah," she said quietly. "She didn't survive Virginia." The outrage grew louder each day as more evidence surfaced. Investigators uncovered previous excessive force complaints against Whitaker, all dismissed in the past. Prosecutors built a timeline that dismantled his entire narrative piece by piece. When the federal trial finally began months later, the courtroom was packed. Prosecutors showed this recovered footage reconstructed from backup servers and digital fragments Whitaker had tried to delete. They played the video of Naomi identifying herself. They showed the frame where her hands were clearly cuffed. They presented forensic analysis proving the bullet entered from an angle impossible if she had been reaching for a weapon. Then Ava Reynolds took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but she told the story clearly. She described the rain, the flat tire, Naomi's calm instructions, and the moment everything turned violent. "She told me to be her witness," Ava said quietly. "So that's what I did." Whitaker's defense argued he feared for his life. They tried to suggest Naomi made a threatening movement. But during cross-examination, the prosecutor asked one simple question that hung in the courtroom like a hammer. "Officer Whitaker," she said, "how exactly was Captain Harper supposed to reach for a weapon while her hands were cuffed behind her back?" Whitaker opened his mouth and said nothing. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Then they returned with the verdict. Guilty on every count. Attempted murder, civil rights violations, obstruction of justice. The judge sentenced Derek Whitaker to 28 years in federal prison. For a moment, the courtroom sat in silence, like everyone was processing the weight of what had just happened. Naomi's family held each other. Prosecutors closed their files. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered quietly as the news spread across the country. But the story didn't end there. Prince William County later approved a massive settlement with Naomi's family. The governor signed sweeping legislation requiring body camera footage to upload automatically to independent servers so officers could no longer delete it. People began calling it Naomi's Law. 11 months after the shooting, Naomi finally opened her eyes in a rehabilitation hospital. The room was quiet when it happened. No dramatic alarms, just a slow blink and the faint realization that the world looked different now. Her mother rushed to her side, tears streaming down her face. Marcus Delgado, a fellow Marine who had stood by her through the entire ordeal, stepped forward and whispered, "You're back." Naomi tried to move. Nothing below her chest responded. The doctors explained everything carefully. The spinal cord damage, the paralysis, the wheelchair she would rely on for the rest of her life. Naomi listened without interrupting. Then she asked one question. "What can I still do?" Weeks later, she recorded a short message that would spread across the country just as quickly as the original video. "I forgive the man who shot me," she said calmly, "but I don't forgive the system that taught him he could." That line sparked a national debate that still hasn't ended. Some people called it grace. Others said the system still hasn't changed enough because the truth is, One trial, one sentence, even one new law doesn't erase the damage done in 42 seconds on a rainy highway. Naomi rebuilt her life from a wheelchair. She speaks occasionally to young officers about responsibility and judgment. Ava Reynolds spent years dealing with the trauma of witnessing the shooting. The people involved in the case all carried scars in different ways. And that leaves a question that people still argue about today. Was justice really done here? Or was one man punished so the rest of the system didn't have to answer harder questions? I'd like to hear what you think. Do you believe the outcome of this case changed anything, or do stories like this keep repeating because the deeper problems never get fixed? Tell me in the comments, and if you've ever witnessed a moment where power was abused or someone was judged unfairly, share that story too. Sometimes the only way truth survives is when ordinary people refuse to stay silent.